but then goes on to perhaps set out some of the framework, some of the, I suppose, the opening positions that the UK government will be adopting. What is then going to happen from that point onwards is that, first of all, we will see in Parliament a number of bills coming through. The first of which will be the Great Repeal Bill, which as many of the speakers tonight have referred to. And that we expect to be in the Queen's speech, and we expect it probably to be the first bill that starts proceeding through the House of Commons from the bills that are contained in the Queen's speech. What is not clear is how many other bills related to Brexit will also be in the Queen's speech, because, I mean, depending on which paper you read, the number of bills associated with Brexit could run from 17 to 15. It is very clear that there will have to be, soon afterwards, a bill about immigration, for instance, because there will need to be clarity in relation to the 3 million EU citizens who currently have been abandoned by the government in terms of what this means for them post-Brexit. There will have to be a bill about the environment, because so much of our legislation, 80% I think in Amy's slides, of legislation that relates to the environment comes from the European Union. There may well be a workers' rights bill, and that list probably gets longer and longer and longer, but we don't know whether they will be in the Queen's speech or not. And then at the same time, once that letter's been received, then I'm sure the government will start in earnest the negotiation process with the other 27 EU countries. And they, as I understand it, will be ready within a couple of weeks of starting that process with our government. Now, the Great Repeal Bill, what this is trying to do, it is trying to, in one bill, probably in a skeleton way, a framework way, address the something like 12,000 EU regulations that have been adopted into UK law, to incorporate them into UK domestic law. But as you'll have seen from the slide that had Andrea Ledson's photograph on, and I must say she's looking rather haggard, and this is true of all government ministers, the Brexiteers, because I think it's finally dawned on them that those slogans they're now having to translate into action. And the action and the scale of what they're embarking on is absolutely huge, because they are trying to unpick it's not 2 years really, it's actually 15 months. They're trying to unpick 40 years of closer cooperation with the European Union. And I say it's 15 months because, of course, once the UK has triggered it, so the 29th of March, yes, there is, in theory, 2 years in which to negotiate, but in practice, there needs to be, before the end of that 2 years period, a sign-off by the European Parliament and a sign-off by the 27 EU member states and their parliaments. And you'll recall what happened in relation to the Canada-EU trade deal with when the Walloon government, or the Walloon Parliament, so half of the Belgian government, decided to block that and really put their foot down towards the end of those negotiations. Now, this is going to be 27 countries that have got to ratify the agreement that the UK is going to make. So we have 15 months, in reality, to negotiate probably only the divorce. I don't think it's realistic to expect that anything very much about how our new relationship with the European Union is going to work will be agreed within those 15 months, because it's too short a time scale. So they will probably agree the divorce proceedings. And that will be things like, and you've already heard the figures bandied around, it's 60 billion euros to buy our way out of the European Union, or according to the Brexiteers, they're going to give us money back. So somewhere in between, who knows, 30 billion euros, perhaps that may be the figure that the EU is going to say the UK has to pay to buy our way out of this arrangement. So we've got 15 months in which to do this. Now, the Great Repeal Bill as I said, we'll have to tackle these 12,000 regulations, and in the process, clearly, there are going to be big challenges, because of course these regulations very often will refer to European Union institutions that we're saying we don't want to be part of. So we're trying to incorporate in a rush all of these regulations, whilst at the same time we're saying, well, actually a lot of things that are referred to in these regulations we're not going to be part of. So I think there are huge challenges, I think, as other speakers have said, about how many stumbling blocks, how many black holes are we going to leave at the end of this process, because we're going to try to do so much in such a short period of time, with departments like DEFRA having seen a 30% cut in their staff, which is going to present a challenge for them in terms of whether they've got the capacity to look at this legislation, try and work out what the hell it means, because it might be stuff that was passed 30 years ago, and the institutional knowledge about that left the DEFRA department 20 years ago. So they've got to try and work out what is not relevant, what can be incorporated, what has been incorporated in part, and so on. What the government have said is that they're going to simply absorb everything. Well, now we know that's not possible. So they're going to absorb as much as they can. They're going to absorb what it is practical to absorb. So watch that. And what are they going to be deeming impractical? And how much of that might be, for instance, environmental legislation? Because although the government are saying they're going to incorporate this into domestic law, if you look at the track record, I think it was 1010 in Max's presentation, you read off some of the things that had gone. I should point out most of the things that you referred to, I think possibly all of the things that you referred to, were actually things that were agreed in coalition when a Liberal Democrat Secretary of State was in charge of the Energy and Climate Change Department, Ed Davey, and those are the things that the government have started to tear out. So are we confident that they are going to in fact absorb within domestic law all of the EU legislation? There's got to be a question mark over that, given the actions they have taken in the last couple of years. So there's that challenge, and then there's the challenge that others have referred to about who is actually going to enforce this, because of course we have at the moment the European Commission, the European Court of Justice, who can enforce it, and they can levy fines. Now what the government's position so far appears to be is that organisations like 1010, Friends of the Earth, can mount themselves legal challenges against the government. That is one of the routes the governments are considering as an alternative to having something like the European Commission. Well, I would suggest that's a rather unfair change in terms of saying that a well-resourced body like the European Commission, which was able to take the UK government to court, is now that responsibility is going to be handed over to NGOs for them to initiate it. Certainly that's what Therese Coffey thought was going to be the approach the government was going to adopt. So who's going to enforce this? Then there are any number of frameworks. Now I agree the common fisheries policy isn't the best policy that was ever designed, but I think it is starting to change, as is the common agricultural policy, where I think often people think it's as it was 10 years ago in terms of paying farmers to produce mountains of products that then just got dumped because there wasn't a market for them. Some of those things have started to change. So, but in any case, if we're not going to have a common fisheries policy, what are we going to have instead? And are we going to, in the case of the common fisheries policy, what's actually going to happen when we exit it is that an earlier treaty is going to apply, and that earlier treaty actually says that other countries have access to our waters being between 6 and 12 miles offshore, and that is the most productive from a fisheries point of view. So getting rid of the common fisheries policy ain't actually going to make that much difference, because we've then got to get rid of the predecessor treaty as well if we're going to want to secure our waters. So the scale of what's been embarked on, I don't think really anyone has properly within government has grasped the scale, and certainly some of the promises that were made in relation to trade. So I think back in October or November last year, I can't remember if it was David Davis or Liam Fox were saying that we will have initiated by then, so back in October last year, back in the autumn last year, we will have initiated trade negotiations with all of our major trading partners. Absolutely not. No, we haven't. No, we're not going to. Not for many months, if not years from now. So I think it is dawning on the government. I'm not. I commend you for finding some positives about Brexit. I know that I should be finding positives. I'm struggling to find them. But I think there are real challenges. The opportunity cost, as other people mentioned, is enormous, because whilst we have major problems in our health service, we have major problems in terms of funding in schools, we have challenges around things like air quality, the government does not have the resource, does not have, I think, the will to focus on that, because so much time, effort and money has got to go into dealing with Brexit. So, to finish, perhaps on a positive point, my small demand or small request would be that everyone here makes a point not of emailing or even ringing their Member of Parliament, but actually going and speaking to their Member of Parliament face to face, and if you can't get access to them in their surgery face to face, put in a complaint to their chief whip, because that's the person who should deal with it, because anyone's entitled to speak to their Member of Parliament, and certainly if anyone comes to the Liberal Democrat chief whip, that being me, to complain about a Liberal Democrat Member of Parliament not being willing to meet a constituent, it's something that I will follow up. So go and speak to your Member of Parliament, say, I want you to ensure that post-Brexit the environmental standards we have in the UK are at least as good as they are now, and then choose one or two very specific things that you believe are important in the environmental field, and mention those 2 or 3 things, so as to get your Member of Parliament to come back on those specific things about what they're going to do to ensure that those environmental regulations, if that's what they are maintained. The second thing that I was going to suggest in terms of a much greater ask, now this clearly does apply, I suspect, to nearly everyone, if not everyone here, and that is actually get involved for real in a campaigning organisation. I wouldn't necessarily suggest the Labour Party, but I would suggest the Democrats, but clearly there are NGOs and the Green Party and others who are represented here. Don't get involved in click activism, if I can be rude about that for a second. Get involved in actually face-to-face lobbying, working with businesses, working with schools, working with any organisations that you feel are appropriate, but real campaigning, not a fire and forget, which I'm afraid tends to generate a fire and forget in return, if you're really lucky, because some members of Parliament refuse. I don't, but some actually refuse to deal with what I call click activism, because our inboxes do get rather full of identical emails. So get involved in a real campaigning organisation, pick the campaigns you want to be actively involved with, and get involved. And if you're not already coming on the March for Europe on Saturday, I'd recommend you get to Marble Arch by about 11, that's where it's starting from, and then you can start campaigning on this, because I'm still holding out a little bit of hope that Brexit might not actually happen. We might have a second referendum in which everyone can vote and say, well, actually, this was a big mistake. We've seen what the consequences are now, and we want to stay in the European Union. Thank you.